there is a city in this country that pays a private company for permission to close its own streets. Not a permit fee to a government office. A cash reimbursement wired to a group of investors every time a parade, a festival, or a construction crew pulls a block of metered parking out of service. Over one 7-year stretch, a Chicago television investigation counted about $41 million in these payments, climbing from $5 million in 2015 to $11 million the year after. You would assume this is a mistake, some clerical accident nobody caught. It is not. This is a machine doing exactly what it was built to do, and by the end, you will understand every gear inside it. The headline says, Chicago sold its parking meters to Abu Dhabi. That sentence is built to mislead you. And since accuracy is the only thing that survives a comment section on a subject like this, we fix it now. Chicago did not sell its meters. It leased them, a 75-year concession that legally reverts to the city in 2083. And Abu Dhabi does not own them. The Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, the Emirates Sovereign Wealth Fund, holds a minority stake, just under a quarter, about 24.9%, inside a consortium led by the Wall Street bank Morgan Stanley and rounded out by the German firm Allianz Capital Partners. So the onus is longer. A Chicago mayor handed 75 years of a public revenue stream to a Morgan Stanley group with a Gulf fund as one silent partner tucked inside it. Hold that shape in your mind. Everything that follows hangs off it. Go back to December of 2008. The country is sliding into the worst crash since the Depression. Chicago cannot fill its budget holes, and Mayor Richard M. Pia, Daley's team walks into the city council with an offer that sounds like free money. Lease the city's metered parking, roughly 36,000 spaces, to a new company called Chicago Parking Meters, LLC, and take a single upfront check for about $1.15 billion. One payment, enough to plug the deficit with a little left over. The agreement ran more than 500 pages. The council was given a few days to read it, then they voted, 40-5, to hand over the meters until 2083. Only 5 voted no, among them Scott Wagesback and Leslie Hairston, who said out loud that nobody had done the arithmetic. They were right. Many who voted yes would later call it the worst vote of their careers, and the Better Government Association labeled the episode a case study in worst practices. When the higher rates hit in early 2009, the new pay boxes jammed and broke across the city, and the public backlash was immediate. As for that windfall, the money that supposedly justified the deal, it was almost entirely gone within about 2 years, spent plugging the same budget holes it was meant to solve. The city sold 75 years of tomorrow to get through a couple of bad winters. Months after the vote, in June of 2009, the city's own Inspector General, David Hoffman, estimated that Chicago had been paid about $974 million less than it would have earned by running those meters itself over the full term. That is an estimate, not a receipt. But it came from inside City Hall, and nobody has knocked it down since. So who collects the money now? Chicago Parking Meters is led by Morgan Stanley, with Allianz and the Abu Dhabi Fund alongside it. And according to the journalist Matt Taibbi, whose book Griftopia dug into the deal, Morgan Stanley was already lining up outside investors to take pieces of the asset while the council was still rubber stamping it. The public street was being carved into private stakes almost before the vote was gavelled shut. Now the math. In 2010, Bloomberg reporters went through the operator's own note sale documents and projected a profit of about $9.58 billion before interest, taxes, and depreciation over the life of the lease. That works out to roughly 80 cents of profit on every dollar of projected revenue. 80 cents on the dollar. An ordinary parking operator in a normal market cannot come near a margin like that. And to be precise, that figure is a projection across 75 years, not cash already sitting in a vault. The reason an asset like this draws a sovereign fund and a Wall Street bank is not complicated. City parking is a monopoly on a daily necessity. The rates only ratchet upward, no competitor can undercut them, and a government contract enforces every dollar of it. That is about as close to a perfect security as the private market gets. Predictable and backed by law, the exact cash flow that pension funds and sovereign funds hunt for around the world. Chicago handed over decades of it in a single afternoon. The years since made the projection look cautious. Independent KPMG audits, reviewed by the Chicago station NBC5, show the meters have generated roughly $1.97 billion through 2024. The operator earned back its entire original investment in about 10 years. Income keeps breaking records, around $150 million in 2023 and $160 million the year after, rising every year since 2020. By 2019, the investors had their money back plus another $500 million in profit, with more than 60 years still to run. In fairness, the operator points to the roughly $38 million it spent modernizing the meters, the refunds, and the around-the-clock service. That is real. It is also the smallest part of the story. Here is what it cost you at the curb. Before the deal, parking ran about $0.25 an hour. Today it runs between $2.50 and $7 an hour, among the highest rates in the country, and in some neighborhoods the price to park has climbed by more than 500%. When the city ran the meters, it kept only a sliver of that. Now a private consortium keeps the entire climbing amount. And the contract reaches past your wallet, because the city owes a payment, called the true-up, every time meters are removed or blocked. Every bike lane, every bus lane, every street redesign now carries a hidden private invoice. When spaces went offline during the pandemic, the operator sought about $322 million in arbitration. The city's own appraiser put the loss closer to $120 million, and it settled for about $15.5 million. Redrawing its own streets now comes with a bill from a private landlord, and that landlord's rights have been challenged in court again and again, and upheld on appeal every time. The deal is, in the word nearly everyone in Chicago now uses for it, ironclad. The meters were never the only thing on the table. In 2005, Daley leased the Chicago Skyway toll bridge for $1.83 billion over 99 years, the first privatization of an existing toll road in the United States, and its investors flipped it a decade later for $2.8 billion, roughly $1 billion in profit on an asset they did not build. In 2006, 4 downtown parking garages went the same way for $563 million. Each time, the same trade, long-term public revenue swapped for a one-time check. There is a reason this keeps happening, and it is not stupidity. A one-time check lands inside a single budget year, where a mayor can spend it, announce it, and be out of office long before the bill arrives. The lost revenue works the other way, bleeding out across decades onto successors who never signed a thing. The incentives all point one direction: sell the future, because the future does not vote in the next election. If you want the mechanism and not the outrage, this channel takes one of these machines apart every week. Subscribe, and you will start seeing the same gears turning inside deals that never reach your local news. Because the strangest chapter of this one was still to come. In 2025, the Morgan Stanley Consortium decided it was finished and put the remaining decades of the concession up for sale. And in the fall of that year, something hard to believe happened inside City Hall in secret. Mayor Brandon Johnson's team decided the city should buy its own meters back. They bid. Working through advisors, the city offered somewhere around $3.3 billion, nearly triple the $1.15 billion it was paid in 2008, to reclaim the very thing it had already sold, with fewer years left on the clock. Then, in January of 2026, Johnson walked away from his own bid. Be careful here, because the easy version is wrong. Johnson gave a public reason for walking, and it is a defensible one. Buying the meters back meant borrowing billions, sending nearly all of the city's parking revenue to debt service for about 40 years, forcing annual rate hikes, and betting against the risk that parking habits themselves might change. He called the final price something that would have made a bad deal even worse. On the economics, reasonable people can stand with him. The scandal is not the reasoning, it is the secrecy. Johnson hid the bid and the entire process from the city council. His team signed a confidentiality agreement with Morgan Stanley and did not disclose that the city had bid at all until May, months after quitting the race, even after the seller and the eventual buyer had both waived their own side. the people with the legal power to approve or kill any deal, were kept in the dark by their own mayor. And the buyer was waiting. A New York infrastructure firm, Stone Peak Partners, agreed to pay about $2.5–3 billion for the roughly 57 years still left on the lease. By then, the concession was throwing off about $137 million a year, which is precisely why a firm like Stone Peak would pay that much for the tail end of a lease it did not originate. Under the original contract, the city council must approve any transfer of the meters. The same body that got rushed through a 40-5 vote in the crash suddenly held a veto, so they used it. When the sale reached the council, it stalled. At least 22 aldermen pledged to reject the transfer, less over Stone Peak itself than over how the mayor had handled the entire matter behind their backs. Some objected that Stone Peak owns an airline, Omni Air International, that flew deportation flights for federal immigration authorities. The Finance Committee vote was called off rather than lost, and the sellers threatened to sue if the council walked. Out of that came a surprising move. The mayor's own budget chair, Alderman Jason Irvin, floated a plan for the city to take the meters back through a new public infrastructure trust, funded with a mix of city pension money and municipal bonds, an entity that could hold the meters and keep the revenue in Chicago instead of sending it, in his phrasing, halfway around the world. It is a long shot. Rahm Emanuel built a public trust much like it more than a decade ago, and it accomplished almost nothing before being shelved. And Chicago already carries more than $10 billion in tax-backed debt and tens of billions more owed to its pension funds, which makes borrowing billions to buy back a parking system a real gamble, not an abstract one. The deadline for the council to accept or reject Stone Peak has now been pushed back twice, landing at the end of September, and with the council not meeting through August, the question is punted into the fall, still unresolved. Step back and the shape of it comes into focus. For 75 years, two parties have sat across one table. One side managed a budget and fought in election cycles, always one bad winter away from needing a check today. The other managed a portfolio and fought in decades, patient enough to wait an 80% margin out across 3 generations of drivers. That asymmetry was the entire game, and the private side has never once lost it. The aldermen who cast that 40-5 vote will almost all be gone by the time the lease ends, and the people who will run Chicago when the meters revert in 2083 have not been born yet. This was never a story about a foreign fund buying an American landmark. It is a story about the difference between managing money and managing a moment. And in 2026, Chicago learned the closing lesson of that difference. Buying its own streets back now costs about 3 times what the city was paid to give them away, on a lease with more than half a century still left to run.